Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Sunil Dasgupta. You are at the Action Committee for Transit monthly general meeting. Thank you for coming. Our guest, Councilmember Andrew Friedson, will be here shortly and speak about the future of road safety in Montgomery County. One of the things we do while we wait for him, we have some announcements, some good news things, and announcements of things we are doing. But first of all, what we do is we take this opportunity to say where we're from. So I'll start it with me, Sunil Dasgupta. I live in Aspen Hill.
All right. Sean Robertson. I live in Kensington.
Rodolfo Perez. I live a mile from Glenmont Station.
Hey. My name's Sylvia Pineapple. I have an apartment in Wakefield. Tina Slater, live just down Wayne Avenue near the Purple Line, Wayne and Dale stop.
Don Slater, I live with her. Good choice.
Mike Larkin, downtown Silverstone.
Mike Wilson, downtown Silverstone.
Kenny Love from Greenview. I live in Bethesda.
Welcome.
Keith Campbell, Bethesda.
So Bill Polino, Silver Spring.
Jonathan Bernstein, Silver Spring.
Jeff Whitehour, Forest Glen.
Chip Plummer, College Park.
Dan Shardwell, Wheaton.
Eric Herron, Germantown.
Ben Ross, Bethesda.
Paul Golden, Woodside Park, Silver Spring.
Chris Farrell, Kent Mill.
Ed Trevor, Aspen Hill.
Azan, Bethesda.
Hi, Love Boone in Noma.
Kathy Jens, East Silver Spring.
All right, I think, yes.
And this lady.
Why didn't you
Our
announce?
name and where we're from.
Kelly Gordon, I live in East Silver Spring.
Thank you for coming. So we did that. I want to bring over Lev Bunin, our organizer, to talk about the great work he's been doing organizing events beyond this monthly meeting.
Good evening, everybody. For those of you who are not following us on social media, please change that. But in all sincerity, we are having events happening every Saturday this summer, or we have come to call it our Summer of Activity or Summer of Action, depending on which it you prefer. This coming weekend, and we will be right here in Silver Spring. We'll be discussing the Purple Line in our backyard. You know, we've been hearing from people all across the county about questions, concerns, and general tribulations that people have had with the construction of our very exciting light rail project, and we are going to be gathering just to discuss how we can best respond to them in our everyday lives. That will be held over at the Silver Spring Library, where a Purple Line station will be in a couple short years. Week after that,
What time?
that will be time is 11 a.m. And we'll provide a lemonade, some fruit, brownies, maybe some cookies. We'd love to see you there.
This Saturday.
This Saturday. That's this Saturday, July 15th.
Is it outdoors where the construction is going on?
It is next to it. It is in the
Yeah.
plaza
Okay.
area, and we
Not
will.
inside the building.
No, it's not inside the building, unless it's so oppressively hot that we take a vote and say, okay, we're moving inside. Anyway, the week after that, on July 22nd, we will be having an event in Rockville Town Center on placemaking. That evening, that's also at 11 a.m. We'll be discussing, how we can make our, communities not just, places where people live, but also places where people play, people work, and people all can enjoy the various facets of everyday life. Make it a place. We will have more event and announcements in the days to come, and we're looking forward to our speaker this evening, and as well as next month, on August 8th, we will be having Upneat Otwall all to discuss the redevelopment of the Lake Forest Mall. So put that one on your calendars. That'll be right here, same time, same place. As always, please continue to follow, share, like, subscribe, all that jazz on our social media feeds. It really does help get our message out there. And if you have an idea for a Saturday event, feel free to shoot us a message. We would love to hear it because I can only come up with so many ideas myself. In addition, if you're at a red line station and on Wednesdays or Fridays, sometimes Tuesdays, in the next few weeks, you might see me. I'll be giving out free homemade chocolate chip cookies and getting people signed up. A few of you I know have seen me, so I would be, tell your friends to be on the lookout. Suna?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So August is Upneet Atwal, who's going to talk about Lake Forest Mall redevelopment. And September, we have a guest speaker, Gene Lyons, who's going to talk about the Rockville Town Center Master Plan. And following that, I believe we're going to get Nick Finio from the University of Maryland talking about his work comparing rent increases around Purple Line stations. So, very exciting programming. And of course, I want to say that we all come from different parts of the county, and you know your part of the county better than almost anybody else. So if you want to organize something in your part of the county, reach out to Lev, reach out to me, reach out to Ben, reach out to the board, and we will we will try to organize something in your neck of the woods. November 11th is the ACTS Biennial Gala. More information to come up. We will send out more information about that. But please, if you can put it in your calendars, we would appreciate that. We will be. This is one of our biggest fundraiser events. So we really hope for more support. Of course, we ask that you become a member of ACT if you're not already, and if you are already, to talk to your friends and family about also becoming members of ACT, because it is through your contributions that we are able to run the organization. We have a couple of updates. I'm going to invite Ben Ross over to talk about Purple Line and its place on Wayne Avenue.
Right. The current plan for the Purple Line is that on Wayne Avenue, it will run in mixed traffic with sharing a lane with cars between right over here where it turns onto Wayne Avenue, in the next block here by the library, and where it goes into the tunnel before it gets to Cyber Creek.
Before it gets to Flower Avenue, it crosses like a creek and then goes into.
Okay. But it's that what was not originally the plan. It occurred as a completely unnecessary concession to NIMBYs. People living on Wayne Avenue who wanted to be able to park in front of their house. And Wayne Avenue is only 4 lanes, so that would leave only 2 lanes for the cars to share with the trains. Now, at the time, the transportation planners said that Wayne Avenue would not have enough capacity in rush hour with the trains mixing with the cars. There'd be too much traffic. So what they finally did as a concession to the people that wanted to park in front of their houses was they would let them park in front of their houses from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is pretty useless, frankly, if you want to park in front of your house. But will considerably slow down the Purple Line trains for the many thousands of people who will be riding it for the sake of 61 parking spaces, only available from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So, with the new administration, ACT a few weeks ago sent a letter to the Secretary of Transportation asking for a reversal of that decision. And we had hopes that that would be immediately very well received, but it was, we have not gotten any response so far, and the vibrations we're getting are that, oh, it's so hard to change plans, even on something as easy as this. So at the present time, we're waiting for reaction, and we are still very hopeful for a positive reaction from MDOT, because sometimes the force of logic holds sway, especially when doing the logical thing doesn't cost any money. Probably even save them a little bit of money. Negligible compared to the overall cost. But at present, we are waiting on a response, and we are hopeful for a positive response. But depending on how this goes, we may have to come back to our members and look for a little more push.
Thank you, Ben. As we wait for Councilman Friedson to arrive, I think he's just arrived. Are there things that have been on your mind that you've been wanting to talk about? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Yeah, did you hear that Metro has plans they're talking about?
Metro plans?
Yeah, maybe to build a new subway line, reroute the blue line.
That's right. So actually, Ben just brought this up yesterday with me, saying, "Where's the speaker on that?" So I am working. I am working on it. Hopefully, we will get somebody to come and talk about it. It's a lot of money, though. I mean, a new line.
In a many-year.
And a many-year project and all of that. And right now, Metro has a $750 million hole to fill. So it's going to be interesting how they navigate through this process. The interstate compact that underwrites all of this, that's what needs to be revisited, and I think they have to fix that in some way to be able to not put Metro at the mercy of the different jurisdictions like we have in the past. Is there anything else that, yes?
But more on the Purple Line subject. Yeah, is there any timeline for when all the scaffolding at the library is going to be removed? I guess they're building the station now, right?
Yes, and as Lieutenant Governor Miller said in June, fingers crossed.
Well, the reason I think it's important
It is important.
that if there's any desire to start building buzz for it, that's the way to do it, that spot.
I agree. I mean, I think they're going to try hard to get the construction completed, but there's utility work still left to do, and utility work is really, really painstaking. It's just a bear, and so it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Hi. Welcome. So we were talking about what's going on, but now that you're here, I'm going to... No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you. Do you want to catch your breath? Anything? No, I'm good. Okay. All right. Good. All right. And so I want to introduce Councilmember Andrew Friedson, who's are the Vice President of the Council and the Chair of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, and one of the people that actually put infrastructure down in the form of bike lanes. And so I think eminently qualified to talk about road safety and the future of road safety in Montgomery County.
Appreciate that.
Welcome.
Eminently qualified is about the over-exaggeration of the decade, if not the century, but I really appreciate you allowing me to join you this evening. Thank you, Sunil. By the way, I saw you at El Sapo. I don't know who else was involved, but apparently there was a pregame for this festivity. I didn't get the invite to that, but I did have 2 events before this. Apologies for being a few minutes late. The good news, by the way, you can go to a happy hour and walk to your next event, and it's totally safe.
That's right. Okay,
So,
that's good.
very important. Very important. It's a safe and fun way to travel. But really appreciate being here. Really appreciate all the work that you do. So first, let me just say thank you. This organization has really been at the forefront of addressing so many issues over such an extended period of time. And it's about transit. It's about safer streets and safer roads. It's about changing the way that we think about building communities so that they're livable, walkable, and are safe to do that. We talk a lot about the walkability and the livability and the accessibility of communities, but we don't do enough to make sure that they're safely livable and safely walkable and safely accessible. And that's really where I think we're starting to change. I think the good news is I do think that there is an increased focus on road safety in a way that I don't think there was maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. The good news is I think people increasingly want to work and to live and to spend time in places where they can walk to multiple amenities, where they can get from where they work to where they want to go to an activity or go out to grab a bite or go grab a cup of coffee. The challenge is we have infrastructure that is really outdated. And it's hard. It's extremely challenging, not only to change the way that people are accustomed to living their lives, but also the level of disruption and the level of public investment that is needed to change 100 years of infrastructure that was focused on cars and not on people. And that's really the challenge that we have right now. I do think we actually are making progress. It's just the progress is slow. And as that progress is slow, we have people who are literally dying in our streets. And the last thank you to this organization is the incredibly challenging work to do the Go Bike and the Go Shoe memorials. I have attended far too many of those. You all have attended far too many of those, but they're important. And when we talk about the statistics, and we can talk about the 11 people, vulnerable users who were killed on our roadways already this year, we can talk about last year, the completed year, one of the deadliest years that we have had, but they're not statistics. They're people that many of us have met, families that have been robbed of their children and their fathers and their mothers and their siblings, communities that have been completely rocked and shaken. So it is a harrowing challenge. I will say in my first effort on the county council, almost 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, we took up the Veers Mill Corridor master plan. And this was the first Vision Zero master plan that the county had ever undertaken. And one of the things that was fascinating to me was this idea that we were talking about failing and functioning intersections. And I asked about safety. And I said, okay, well, what is a failing and a functioning intersection based on? Well, it's based on throughput. How quickly do cars make it through? It's a binary standard. If congestion reaches a certain point where cars don't go through fast enough, then it fails. But there's no point at which if cars go too fast, through the intersection, that it also fails. And I'm not suggesting, and never have suggested, that we want cars to be at a standstill. I mean, people need to be able to use the transportation options that they use, that suit them and serve them. But if there's a standard on one side, there should be an equal standard on the other side. And the idea that you could have an intersection where multiple people have been killed, and from a public policy standpoint, it's considered functioning properly. That is an insane standard. So then I started looking more into these issues and realized that it all came down in many ways to the MUTCD, the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices, this federal standard, this Byzantine thing that I had never even heard of before I started getting involved in this, that many of you know as your Bible and the engineer's Bible, not necessarily what I was most familiar with. And I was shocked that in so many ways we were using and requiring engineers that were making the day-to-day decisions to use failed standards. The 85th percentile standard is a failed standard. We have adopted in Montgomery County and jurisdictions all over the country and all over the world have adopted Vision Zero. Well, Vision Zero is just a name, but what it really is about is a safe systems approach, of proven engineering standards that we know will keep people safe, that looks at preventing tragedies, not just responding to tragedies. But we still have an engineering standard at the federal level that trickles down to the state level, and that, yes, also trickles down to the county level, where we're looking at reactions to tragedies. So what inevitably happens? I have been successful in many road safety issues, but almost always my success in road safety issues are because of two things. One, many meetings, that wouldn't otherwise have happened but for myself and two other elected officials that demand meetings, which is not a sustainable model from an organizational, chronic dynamic. And number two, and most tragically, it's a response to a tragedy. Someone has died, almost always. And if someone hasn't died, someone nearly died. And that's when the leadership will come together, particularly at the state level. And that's just not a sustainable situation. It will take us 100 years, intersection by intersection, with these failed engineering standards. So that's the bad news. The good news is things are starting to change. Early on, when I was on the council, I had a lunch with Greg Slater. We talked about the different contexts of different roadways. And this idea that US 50 going to the beach is not the same as Colesville Road in Silver Spring, and Georgia Avenue. It's not the same as Wisconsin Avenue and Old Georgetown Road in Bethesda. It's just not the same. There are very few people that are crossing the street of US 50 to drop their kids off at daycare, to pick up their dry cleaning, to grab a cup of coffee with their friends. The idea that we would treat those the same from an engineering standpoint is not only bizarre, it's insane. It just makes absolutely no sense. There had been advocacy that it had happened. It wasn't just that lunch, but it was a big part, I think, of that conversation. And ultimately, State Highway came out with the context-driven guidelines. There's now different standards for different types of community that's essentially determined by the density of the area, which makes a whole lot more sense. Well, why is that important? We were looking at Wisconsin Avenue, and the District 16, District 18 delegation and I were all pushing State Highway to look at dangerous crosswalks where there wasn't a death, but there were a number of collisions. And we knew that a death, it seemed, was imminent. And we didn't want to have to wait until somebody died to get a change. And so we were advocating and pushing, and they studied and looked at different dynamics, and ultimately they came back and said, sorry, we can't do anything here. And the reason was they sent somebody out to look at how many people were crossing the street at particular areas, and the number of pedestrians crossing the street didn't reach the engineering standard. So my response, you can imagine, I'm sure it would be the same response as many people in this room, was, did they use that same standard when determining where to place the Chesapeake Bay Bridge? Because if we waited to decide where to place a bridge based on the number of people who thought it was a good idea and a safe bet to swim or to drive their car or to ride their bike across the Chesapeake Bay to go from the western shore to the eastern shore or vice versa, we'd either have a lot of people drowning or we would never have a bridge. And that is just not a standard that we would ever use in any other transportation context. But we do use that standard when it comes to pedestrian infrastructure and to a certain extent when it comes to bike infrastructure. And it's starting to change in that sense. We actually got State Highway to agree to look at the corridor at least and say, okay, don't look at an individual intersection if the engineering standards don't allow you to do that. Can you look at the stretch of intersections and determine whether or not there is a critical mass en masse, and then can we put in signalized crosswalks and other safer conditions in multiple places across the stretch. And ultimately they did do that. There is there's an additional light and there's a beacon now on Wisconsin Avenue as a result of that. But it's not just the policy changes either. I will note, I was at Old Georgetown Road earlier today trying to cross the street at Cordell. Anybody use that intersection right by Bethesda Elementary School? I mean, if you ever try to walk your kid to school, and I do, take your, walk to school day. Oftentimes at Bethesda Elementary School, it's the closest elementary school to where I live. Or you're going to the farmer's market, which I go to most weekends. I go to Bethesda Farmer's Market. That's my primary way, to get to the Bethesda Farmer's Market. And you hit the button, the light flashes, some people stop and some people don't. And then you create the multi-lane threat that is one of the most dangerous road conditions that exists anywhere, particularly if there's not a lot of congestion and the cars are going at a high rate of speed. So we need a culture shift, we need a policy shift. We're chipping away at it, we're working away at it, but it takes time, it takes work. I'll give an example of some of the things that we've done and some of the changes that we've made, and then I'd love to spend most of the time answering questions. One was a bill early on in my first term related to sidewalks at construction sites. So I represent Bethesda, I used to represent North Bethesda. Good news, bad news. Good news is lots of construction. I believe that's a good thing. It means people want to live here and invest here. That's a positive. Bad news is it caused a lot of disruption. And nobody likes construction. I don't know of anybody who is a big fan of living around construction sites, and it creates safety issues. The challenge that I found, and I walk around Bethesda all the time, among other urban areas of the county, sidewalks were inevitably closed and indefinitely. And I would ask, how long is this sidewalk going to be closed? And it kind of went on forever, or there was a deadline, and the deadline had passed many, many months ago, and I noted the calendar, and it was a huge ongoing issue and challenge and frustration for many people who lived in the community. And so we passed a bill to basically change the standard for sidewalk closures, to make it much more difficult to close a sidewalk, to make the inevitable default position that the sidewalk remains open unless there is a compelling safety issue. If you have to put in utilities and you have to close the sidewalk because there is a major safety issue, I get that. But just like if you had to close a lane of traffic, no one would accept the fact that you closed a lane of traffic indefinitely and didn't tell anybody when it would open. You close a lane of traffic for one afternoon, and it is all over the news. It is all over Twitter. People are going, going crazy about it, and I understand that because it's disruptive to their lives. But that same standard should exist with sidewalks, which are also transportation infrastructure for people who are using them and relying on them on a daily basis. So now you'll notice in downtown Bethesda there are a lot of covered sidewalks. It turns out that is a condition that is used in every urban environment in America, and now it's used in urban environments in Montgomery County too. We do things differently than many other places in many ways. I don't think we always should, and that's a positive example. And actually it was the impetus that Mark Corman used to pass a state bill to do something similar on state roads, although that continues to be a challenge working with State Highway to get some of those changes to be made. Evan Glass, as you know, has a Safe Streets bill that is before the council right now. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. In fact, I had been working with several people here and involved in this organization on a Safe Routes to School measure, and they've kind of been merged into one, which is great. Evan has really taken the lead and shown the leadership of that as council president, as chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee. I had suggested some changes to that bill to strengthen it, specifically on the safe routes to school, and to expand the areas for where the leading pedestrian indicators, the safer signals, to provide more time for pedestrians to safely cross the road to more places that are most likely to be utilized by pedestrians, and to create major safety issues. A little bit of a mixed bag in committee. Some of the amendments that I recommended were accepted, some were not. Some of the main ones, just to give you a sense, and many of you have followed this really closely, but there was a focus in the original bill of pickup and drop-off time. And I think there should be a focus at all times around a school, because children in particular, but everybody, use schools, and pedestrians in particular use schools not just between 7:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m., but they play sports after school. They have after-school activities. There are events at school, and all kinds of different dynamics that are happening at school. At its best, schools should be vibrant places, not just for 6 hours a day, but for most of the day, 18 hours a day probably. So looking at ensuring that, we also wanted to look at the bus stops. These are some of the most dangerous places for young people. I can give you countless examples in District 1. Common occurrence of the young person crossing the street to try to catch the bus and getting hit by a car, oftentimes in a multi-lane threat. Montrose Road, unfortunately, comes to mind. There are other examples of that. My view is within 100 feet of a bus stop should also, any collision that takes place within 100 feet of a bus stop should also be studied, and there should be a formal review. Ultimately, that was not accepted, unfortunately, but it will come back up at committee. And then there's a question of the walk shed. Beyond just the school zone, but the walk shed beyond it. If you're walking to school or you're walking from school, you are vulnerable. That is still your route to school, and I think the broader walk shed should be looked at. There were concerns that were raised for both of those in terms of administrative dynamics. I will note there were 6 collisions that would have triggered this last year. Each one of those 6 collisions were deadly serious. And the idea that we would not trigger a study because any one of those could have been deaths, and unfortunately too often many of them are, to me, 1 death is too many, and 6 is not too many to study. So we'll see where that ends up. It's a really important bill. It's a really great bill. I'm really excited about it. There are a number of areas that I think could be strengthened, and I have tried and will continue to try at full council to address and to strengthen that. Beyond that, I think when we talk about road safety, it's about funding. It's about culture. I do think that the safety element has taken hold a bit. Like when we start to talk to people about these issues, I think when you talk about safety, that tends to be better received. I think there's still some real challenges on bike infrastructure and making the case for why bike infrastructure is important. I think there are still challenges for other aspects of road safety, but when you talk about the core safety issues of being able to walk your kid to school, being able to use a stroller on a roadway, understanding that everybody in our community, if you're in a wheelchair, or you're using other means, has the ability to get to and from where they're going, that is, really important. And I think the change really has to be about viewing sidewalks and pedestrian-focused infrastructure in a similar manner that we view road infrastructure. And that is still where we need a lot of work. And I'll just give a couple examples. On Old Georgetown Road, good example, after Jay Castle died in 2017, we asked State Highway to review the corridor. And we specifically asked them to review the corridor and to remove obstructions from the corridor. And to their credit, in a relatively quick period of time, they moved all of the, what they would consider removable obstructions. Signs were moved out of the sidewalk. We literally had like lots of signs in the middle of a sidewalk. And so if you're biking or you have a stroller or you're in a wheelchair, I mean, it's not a big enough sidewalk to allow you to pass. And so it puts you in an extremely vulnerable and dangerous position. Hydrants couldn't be moved because that is a much higher standard. It's the difference between moving a piece of furniture and moving your plumbing. And so that is an ongoing thing. We, for decades, put fire hydrants in the middle of a sidewalk thinking that was the perfect place to put it. And I have raised the question of whether or not you would put a street sign or a hydrant in the middle of a lane of traffic. Just say, well, this is convenient. It's right where the cars go. That is a perfect place to put a fire. Of course you wouldn't do that, but for years and for decades, we did do that. And we have done that, and it is a real, it is a real challenge. But even the shrubbery, I mean, unfortunately, we had a second death on Old Georgetown Road, not far from where Jake died, Enzo Alvarenga. And where Enzo died, it was an overgrown shrub that had gone into the right-of-way. Well, if an overgrown shrub had gone into a lane of traffic, if you had a tree that had carried over into a lane of traffic and a car clipped it and had $500 worth of damage to the paint, that tree would have been cut down or trimmed or addressed that day. I promise you. But this overgrown shrub that Enzo swerved out of the way, according to accounts and what we understand of it, which ultimately dumped him into the roadway, which led to his tragic death. It was trimmed after the fact, but it was only because he died. If Enzo had called and said, I was biking on Old Georgetown Road, and there was a shrub in the middle of the sidewalk that made it unsafe to pass, that shrub wouldn't have been trimmed for weeks, months, who knows. And that is the challenge I think that is before us. Taking responsibility and accountability that all of our infrastructure is equally important, that if we're going to have safe streets, we need safe streets for everybody. And that means making sure that sidewalks are treated with the level of seriousness that they deserve. That means that trails being treated with the level of seriousness that they deserve, that these are not nice to have. These are need to have if you want to have a comprehensive transportation network that actually serves people in the way that they want. But we have real work to do to make that case. We have real work to do to make up for what has been decades and decades of missteps and of challenges. I will do my best to continue to advocate for many of those changes and really appreciate all the leadership that you have shown and continue to show on these issues. And I look forward to continue to be a partner with you and for you to try to make Montgomery County a safer place and try to make sure that our roadways actually serve the communities and the needs that we currently have. So love to open it up to questions if that's okay. Good for you?
Tina has.
Hi, thank you. Could you discuss automated speed enforcement and how that might impact safety, how it might impact revenue?
Yeah, so automated speed enforcement is currently not allowed under state law. There's state laws being considered of whether or not that would be allowed. There have been civil liberties questions about whether or not to do it. There's a question of whether or not it would be used for distracted driving, for instance, which is a major issue, of course. I have been briefed by representatives of companies that do this, and they do it in other places around the world. The technology is hard to imagine. It's really impressive. Every question that I have asked, there is a much smarter answer that I am capable of mustering a question for. And so the technology is there and it's coming. How long it will take for us to accept it as a legitimate technology and deploy it, I'm not sure, and ultimately it would require and does require state law changes. I think it could have a very important impact on safety. I will tell you there's a racial equity piece to this too. And one of the most interesting conversations that I have had was about speed cameras. Many years ago, I had a conversation with somebody, and it was a person of color, and we were talking about speed cameras. And I said, gosh, speed cameras, and I had some idea about like the fairness, because you can't challenge it, right? And I had raised this issue, and it's before I actually learned a lot more, as I have come to learn being in this role. And I, from a legal standpoint of the ability to go to court and challenge and, face your accuser and all this, and I was thinking about it in a very philosophical way. And the person across the table from me was talking about it and said, it's the only fair way. Because there's no subjectivity, there's no bias. The camera flashes when the behavior happens. Period, full stop. It's the only time I feel like is fair. And it knocked me back. I will admit, I go back to that conversation a lot when I think about the way that we administer laws in general, but specifically when we administer road safety laws. And so when we talk about road enforcement, there are a lot of layers and a lot of elements to them that I think are really important. But it's a fascinating question. I'm not sure Montgomery County specifically is going to answer it, but I do think it's going to be an ongoing debate that happens over the next several years in Annapolis. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, to get involved in it and to weigh in on it, because I think our legislators will have an opportunity to address it. Right?
On the remarks about context-driven design, one of the issues that I know people who I know are heavy in advocacy tell me happens to them a lot, that they'll talk to someone at SNJ about your context-driven design, say this for the speed limit, and then they just can't get a straight answer on why the speed limit can't be lowered. An example that I think of is US 29, that recently the state did walk there, and I know one of the people in the volunteer group advocating there, and I happen to be one of them, I wasn't the person who did this conversation, he said that the context-driven design here in US 29 says we should lower the speed limit, and this stuff about side swipes or fender benders to lower the speed limit. I'm just wondering, do you ever, in your conversations with SHA, ever run into, like, you bring up context-driven design, Old Georgetown Road, or whatever, and they're like, you get like, essentially you get pushback on everything, and what are you doing, or what can be done to push SHA to comply with their own guidelines?
It's a really important question. So, yes, of course. I think my old football coach used to say there's a Jimmy's and a Joe's problem, there's an X's and an O's problem, and for a long time we had both. Right? You had engineers that were trained in a certain context of how things work and should work, and these are human decisions. And then you had a set of criteria, a game plan that was geared that way too. We oftentimes now have one or the other. You have maybe an engineer who's willing to push the envelope a little bit, but then engineering standards that don't quite support it, or you have engineering standards that we've pushed and have changed, but the engineer that still is thinking about things as they were and as they have been, and not as essentially we want them to be. So, I mean, the short answer to that is yes, of course. This is part of the growing pains of change. I know it's not going nearly as fast as anybody here would want. It's not going as fast as what I would want. It is frustrating, but we have started to see improvements. I mean, we just had Edgevale is a good example on East-West Highway. This has been a long-standing safety issue for those familiar. It's basically Chevy Chase is just east of BCC High School. The town of Chevy Chase is on the southern side of East-West Highway and became a major issue when the Sleaford Tunnel was shut down as part of the Purple Line construction, which was a major pedestrian and bicyclist trafficked tunnel that young people in particular, but lots of members of the community use. And East-West Highway there is a downhill, speed builder, the town of Chevy Chase, the District 18 team, and I had advocated with SHA for a change there. We ultimately, got agreement on a signal, but the signal was not adequate, and now there's going to be, or at least, there has been preliminary agreement to put in a full signal, which, obviously would be a major safety improvement. If you had told me 5 years ago whether or not SHA would have agreed to that, I wouldn't have thought that. If you had told me 5 years ago whether SHA would have put in bike lanes on Old Georgetown Road, I probably wouldn't have thought so. If you had told me, several of the changes that have been made would happen, I probably wouldn't have thought that. So things are happening. They're not happening as much as we would want. And like I said, I think the challenge is that Edgevale change, that didn't happen because through the automated system, there was a complaint that was put in and an engineer looked at it and overnight said, yeah, that makes sense. And 24 hours later, the decision was made, and 6 months later, it was implemented. It took municipal leaders, state leaders, elected official in Montgomery County, 4 meetings. I brought Department of Transportation in. We coordinated messages and went back and had multiple meetings, and ultimately that's what was decided. It was a collaborative and positive outcome, but the chances that we could do that intersection by intersection in every dangerous part of the county and every state highway is unlikely. It's impossible. And so that's where we really need the context-driven guideline and the more macro level policy solutions to change, because we're not going to be able to fix these things one at a time, or else it's going to take 100 years to do it. Jonathan?
I was thinking about how we could dignify pedestrians in the major city centers. So think about a corridor that has high traffic during the workflow times, but not so much in the non-work times, to prioritize pedestrian crossing over the car traffic. This came up with me when I was trying to cross Colesville Road along Sligo Creek. And all these families wanted to get across the road, and this was not a commuting time, but it took forever for the signal to get to them. This is something we ought to do as a matter of policy.
Really good point. There are a lot of ways to tackle that. The leading pedestrian indicators is a little teeny tiny fraction of moving in the direction that you're talking about. I don't think as much as what you're talking about, but I think I agree with you. The universal intersections where you cross, where pedestrians can go diagonally, and so the entire intersection is stopped for pedestrians. The concept currently in most intersections is cars are always going, and pedestrians can go where the cars are not going or turning, or they go with the turn at their own risk. But if you were to prioritize pedestrians, or at least equalize pedestrians, you would say cars go, pedestrians go. Cars go, pedestrians go. Like you prioritize a railroad and cars, at a railroad crossing. Cars stop, the railroad goes. Cars go, the railroad stops or isn't there. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, what we need to head towards. I think there are smaller changes that we could even implement that are even easier than that. I'll give 2 examples. Right turn on red in urban areas. There's no reason to have right turn on red in urban areas. The concept of right turn on red is, I wasn't even born when that concept came out. It was allegedly a concept to save fuel and all kinds of other bizarre dynamics that is not relevant to today. And then channelize intersections. I mean, the most dangerous thing that you could possibly do is to incentivize and lure a car to maintain or increase its rate of speed at the exact point of a potential conflict with a vulnerable user. I mean, another example of just an absolutely insane engineering standard. Why would we create not even the possibility, but the likelihood, increase the likelihood to add to the danger of an already dangerous situation? An intersection is dangerous for everybody, for cars too, right? That's a conflict point. And by increasing the speed of it, you're creating a highway condition. So we started to eliminate those. We actually have filled them in. Old Georgetown Road and 355, those channelized right turns are going away. That's turning into a full T, which is a real positive. That should be the case everywhere. I mean, there just shouldn't be in urban areas channelized right turns. And it's not just the big intersections too. It's also, if you think about Woodmont, heading south into downtown Bethesda off of Wisconsin, that was re-engineered. So it used to be, I'm going to get concave. It used to be concave. Sunil's going to check me here. He's got a wide array of knowledge that I don't have. But it used to allow you to basically maintain your rate of speed coming off of Wisconsin Avenue heading down Woodmont. And that is an area where lots of NIH staff use to go to lunch to downtown Bethesda. People come off the medical center metro to go to that part, the northern part of downtown Bethesda. It is a significantly pedestrian area. It's a very dangerous intersection. It was re-engineered to be convex, to come out. So now it comes out. It did 2 things. One, it lowers the speed instead of maintaining or increasing the rate of speed for the cars, because you actually have to go outside. You have to make a wider veer, turn. It's not a full turn, but it's a veer. And number 2, it decreased the conflict area for the pedestrian. So now the pedestrian gets an extra, you get the number wrong, but let's say an extra 30 or 40 feet of safety, of refuge, before entering the roadway. And instead of it being essentially 35 feet wide, it's 22 feet wide. And that dramatically reduces the likelihood of a pedestrian collision. We could be making those changes everywhere. And that one wasn't even that expensive. It's cement and flowers and mulch. It's basically what we put in and have built that out. And I am there all the time. I walk it, I drive it, I biked it. I have never seen a conflict issue there, whereas before it was a constant issue where a pedestrian would, the 1 foot in and the quick back out because you're afraid that once you see the rate of speed of the cars, you just don't see that anymore. It's just
the
much,
question
much
is
safer.
how to scale this, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's not a huge, that is not, of all of the road infrastructure changes, those are not the most expensive. I mean, right turn on red costs almost nothing. It's a sign. Eliminating channelized right turns or slightly changing the roadway, that's tens of thousands, it's not millions to do that. Now, it's tens of thousands in hundreds of intersections, but it's doable if we commit to it.
Sean, you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Well, on the automated speed enforcement, I was wondering, is there any look at the threshold at which tickets are actually issued? Because, it's bad enough that my street's speed limit is 35, but the drivers know that the real speed limit is 47, because they aren't getting a ticket if they're going 46.
It's a state law.
There's a big difference between a car cresting that hill at 35 versus 47.
Yeah.
And is that a state thing that they
Yeah.
can't take it below that threshold, or is
Yeah.
there anything?
So not only that, it's not only the threshold at which you can give a ticket and the kind of the grace period, where you can even put a speed camera is dictated by the state. We just advocated for the state to lower the speed limit. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. In fact, some would argue that you want speed cameras in places where the speed limit is lower, where the condition, you want cars to drive the slowest, like in neighborhoods and other places, because that's where people are most vulnerable. And in the higher speed areas, you're more expecting a condition where a car is going to go fast. In a neighborhood, or in an area that you would expect a 25 or a 30 mile per hour speed limit, you're not expecting someone to go 50 miles per hour, and the pedestrian infrastructure is not equipped for that. You're not getting as many signals, you're not getting as many crosswalks, you're more on your own. But those are state laws. It's a good example. I mean, I'm not a huge believer in speed limits. Not in the sense that we shouldn't have speed limits, but in the sense that speed limits don't make the biggest difference. Target speed is what changes behavior. So the difference between speed limit and target speed. Speed limit is what a sign says you should go and what you could get a ticket at or get a camera. Target speed is what an ordinary user under ordinary conditions would drive. And the reality is you can design a road to make somebody drive slower and safer. And that's really how you, because we know all along, if you don't trust that someone's going to pull you over and you don't think that there's going to be a speed camera, unfortunately, many people just completely ignore what the posted speed limit is. But in the target speed, it is very difficult, if not dangerous, to drive faster than the target speed because the way that it's designed, because the context around it. Just to give, think about Connecticut Avenue, which has really narrow lanes. People drive slower because the other cars are closer to them.
Well, I appreciate the courage that SHA is looking at further up Connecticut, narrowing those lanes.
Yeah, because
but they're still trying to remove pedestrians from the roadway by removing bus stops or not painting crosswalks because they don't want to encourage pedestrians.
Yeah, but most of those issues, unfortunately, particularly related to speed limit standards and related to camera standards, are state imposed.
Richard?
Yes, I'm looking at the Blue Ribbon Panel on Pedestrian Safety report from 2002, and it calls for a 50% reduction in fatalities by 2005. And 2001 and 2, the pedestrian deaths were at 16. We're already at 11, 20 years later. So I'm a little concerned with we're getting at approach. The crash site where Enzo Alvarenga died because he fell into the street because the overgrowth was from a specific place. And that overgrowth was from a property that's owned by a nonprofit. It could have been it could have been my house at Butzel, Georgetown, but I trimmed back to bushes. But it's directly related to the failed duties of a property owner under county code, and today it's going back. I spoke to the state highway person in charge of vegetation management when he met with Delegate Waldnick and some residents on Goldsboro Road. He told us that 50% of the work of his agency, vegetation management group, that does trimming, 50% of the workload could be eliminated if the property owners did what they're responsible for, not the stuff that they can't reach or that's not next to private property, but the stuff they're responsible for. So I see a lot of press release efforts, but here is a job of just making the institutions work together so that Housing Code Enforcement and Office of Permitting Services works with State Highway collaboratively to reduce their workload, and educate people about their work. So what are your thoughts on how we can decrease the deaths in a more, in a manner that meets the talk and this specific idea?
First of all, I appreciate that you trim your bushes as I walk by your house all the time on Old Georgetown Road, so I appreciate that. I use that sidewalk all the time, as you know, and sometimes we see each other.
Well, you know that I bought $40,000 worth of equipment to remove snow sidewalk with NIH and downtown Bethesda because no homeowner can do that.
Which is another ongoing issue of the same vein, which I was going to mention. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I have convened a number of meetings after Enzo when I became familiar that this is such a chronic issue. There is a challenge of which county and state department and agency feels like it's their responsibility. It certainly is, you're right, it certainly is the responsibility of the property owner. The question becomes, how do we set up a system where people can file a complaint, because it's complaint driven. I mean, most of what we do in county government and to a certain extent in state government is complaint driven, and then gets to the right place and that place be equipped to actually address it. That doesn't exist right now. It just, I mean, realistically, it doesn't. And obviously, you have noted, it has very dire consequences. I have been pushing and chipping away at this, obviously not as successfully as I would like. Another example is with Jake's death, by most accounts at least, there were 2 obstructions that caused his ultimate fall, which resulted directly in his death. One was some type of obstruction, a utility pole, street sign. The other was that it was recycling day. And the county contractor who works for us left the trash bin and recycling in the sidewalk. And so we don't know exactly what happened, but it's believed, swerves out of the way of one obstruction, but already was losing his balance and couldn't swerve out of the second obstruction when his balance was off and ended up in the street, noting that the person who hit him did nothing wrong, actually, was driving, by all accounts, not distracted, was not speeding. We have no indication that Jake or the person who hit Jake did anything except what we told them to do, and yet Jake is dead. And we all have to live with that. I had been working with DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, that oversees that contractor. We sent a letter. They reached out to their contractors to try to address this. It was fixed for a short period of time and then became a problem again. And now it's a problem again. Now we're trying to address it again. So you're absolutely right. Some of this is on homeowners and on property owners and on business owners, but some of it is on us in the county and being able to not only manage our own contractors and how they handle these issues, but being able to respond to complaints and actually address problems before they become tragedies.
So between now and next year, where's the point of input on this issue that I raised? You have already done some work behind the scenes, and the public is not engaged. So I brought it up. Where's the next action point?
We'll have to follow up on you. I don't have a specific point of input that I could point you to, but Matt or I, who are here, can follow up with you, and we can try to come up with an opportunity to have a broader public engagement. Thanks.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Follow up on the vegetation discussion. I was also at a walk and talked to a state guy who does vegetation management about how the laws work. And my question is, if I'm using the right of way, using that public right of way, can I have some skirter, can I trim that branch? And his response is that's a legal gray area. You could be exposed to legal risk if you do that. Is there something the county can do to address that?
I don't know. I could look into that. I asked a similar question in the follow-up conversations that we have, because we did convene State Highway and Department of Transportation and some of the other relevant folks. And I asked that very question, like, what is stopping me as a neighbor saying, you know, what the heck is going on here? This is dangerous for my kids, and just going over and taking matters into my own hands, as long as I don't go into their private property. No different than if it encroached upon your private property, you could cut it down, and that's a little bit more clear. I don't know if the county could do something on that. It's an interesting point I could follow up on, and I will look into that. The ownership rights, the county is preempted on a lot of that stuff by the state and contracts and other rights of way and other things, but I will follow up on that because it's an interesting point.
Maybe several people could write letters to the property owner. Richard Boyd.
Yeah, I mean, that's another, you know, the public pressure,
Sort of
but
like,
the challenge,
oh,
the challenge there is it's not a one,
Yeah.
you know, if there was one property owner in the county
Yeah, yeah.
who was causing this problem, then this group could get on it
Right.
tomorrow and, you know, wage a relentless, you know, public affairs campaign and probably
Facebook, yeah.
pressure them to do it. It's more widespread than that, and I think the challenge is being able to address it.
Well, this is a simple problem of, it's not a simple problem, it's a difficult problem, but it's a problem of getting government agencies to work together, and it's a fundamental duty of, excuse me, our elected officials. And I don't see that, you know, it just takes time is the answer. Part of this is that we do not, and again, this is information that you may not have because, you know, we haven't collectively worked on this, that we don't have a simple pictogram describing what is the conditions that we want to see a sidewalk in. What is the shy space clearance vertically away from the sidewalk and horizontally from us. And if you had, if we as homeowners had that, we could give that to our neighbors and say, this is not my opinion, and this is not to my standard or taste. This is what's required, which would help.
And
We don't even have that, and that's where I think that we just kind of dismissed a lot of work that can be done.
we should definitely work together to create a list of things that we can take to Andrew.
To follow up on
Yeah, go ahead.
one of his points
Go ahead.
about snow. It doesn't happen too often, but if we get a big snow, including ice, especially I've seen it on George Avenue where the pedestrians to get to the bus stop have to go into George Avenue to walk because the snow is so high. And part of it is the snow crew has pushed all that snow off, and then if after the first night, it's frozen. So it's very dangerous for those areas. So there are certain parts that we need to also get to the sidewalks as well as just the roads.
Yeah, it was another example, but I was trying to talk about the county's own contractors. Like the people who are plowing the roads are county contractors, overwhelmingly, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly. And it is a chronic issue. Now, Richard is right that businesses and residents have the responsibility of clearing their own sidewalk. That doesn't happen with the regularity that it needs to clear, the right-of-way in front of your property. But you're also right that even when they do, there could be a plow that then comes in and banks up, a huge amount of snow, even on a relatively small snowfall. If you're building up from a plow and bringing it off the side, it could be a foot, 18 inches of buildup.
And one site near Hewitt, I don't know whose property that is, if that's county property or what, because there's no really property owner in that sidewalk area.
All this conversation just actually reminds me that we should get somebody from permitting services to come by and talk to us. So if you have other questions, this kind of permitting kind of issues, enforcement kinds of issues, actually just gave me, this conversation just gave me an idea. Do we need a speaker around that? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, hey Andrew, how are you?
Susan, good to see
So
you.
the question is about, when I see some of the pedestrian safety issues, which is talking about, there's some route, Route 55 that is talking about, when the vehicle is turning left, but however, when there's like a walk on lane that has a signal, I even mentioned there's two of it that I can see, that I can even see, such as when I was taking the public transportation route 26 that goes to Glenmont, they even start to turn left, even when there's a signal that comes to allow for pedestrian to walk, because this is something that I've seen, is because I see a lot of people walking to Metro to either to North Bethesda or to the Trevor station, wherever people needs to take to get along to, to work. There's like two issues I see, because we don't want people to get hurt, or we don't want anyone to get hit.
So you're saying the pedestrians have a walk signal, but the bus is making a left turn?
Yeah, even the bus, including the rest of the vehicle that was making a left turn, even when there's a walking signal, that's something
I think this is speaking to what Jonathan was talking about earlier about prioritizing pedestrians at intersections. Because, what I was saying before, because we very rarely, if ever, have pedestrian-only times, you create conflicts. So if cars are going at all times, the cars can go straight, but those cars can also turn. That, the pedestrians aren't going where the cars are going straight, because they're stopped from doing that. They're going where the cars are turning. And so it is one of the challenges that we have if you don't create leading pedestrian indicators, which is part of the bill that I mentioned earlier, that is going to prioritize that, where you give several seconds, additional time only for pedestrians, or doing the type of, the X where pedestrians can cross diagonally across the intersection or around the sides. That means that no car is going at that point. Now, it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
My good friend likes to say we've made a bargain, and the bargain's not such a good bargain, but there are trade-offs always, right? And so if you do pedestrian-only signals, you have cars that can't go for a period of time, and that is going to create a level of a congestion, potentially. Now, the question is, and I think we all have to grapple with this question, is what is the level of congestion? It's not standstill. I don't think anybody is advocating for that, at least who I am familiar with. But what is the level of congestion? What is the level of speed that we're willing to accept in order to enhance safety? Or what is the level of safety that we are requiring and demanding and willing to accept some trade-off of slowing down of cars? And that's a very important universal question, and I don't think we have come up with a legitimate consensus on that point.
Eliminate the cars somehow.
Some people might say eliminate the cars. I'm not sure I'm there, but I appreciate the point.
There's an enormous backlog of requests for sidewalks in Montgomery County. Is there any way, what are the chances of an increase in the budget to at least start to whittle that backlog down somewhat?
Yeah, the sidewalk issue is a funding issue, but it's also a political issue. I just want to be totally honest about this. The standard for sidewalks basically more or less allows for like community vetoes. And it pits communities against each other. I will tell you, if you want to be in an ugly conversation and meeting, show up to a sidewalk meeting at a civic organization or a neighborhood association. I've done it. I've got the black and blue marks to prove it. It is a huge challenge. There are major divides. I think there are sometimes generational divides. Newer members of neighborhoods, want sidewalks. People who have been living in neighborhoods for longer periods of time, are used to not having sidewalks. There are tree considerations, where, it's hard to not take down a tree if you need to put a sidewalk that's relatively efficient and, in a reasonable place. And so there are major challenges. I will say, and Matt has been really great, Matt Higgins, who's in the back here, I want to acknowledge, and actually Paul Ellis as well from Kate Stewart's office. But Matt and I, but mostly Matt, to be honest with you, has worked really closely with communities who have had concerns on sidewalks to try to navigate compromises to get to reasonable places where you can install sidewalks, but maybe limit the number of trees that are being impacted, or use a different type of surface that is more environmentally sustainable and allows for trees to survive. So yes, we need more money for it. Yes, I will advocate and have advocated for more money on it, but I'm also looking at and have been looking at the actual process for sidewalks, because I actually think that's the bigger issue. I think the money part is not nothing, but it's easier. The process of sidewalk requests and approvals is a very difficult process, and I think for a county like ours and communities like ours that is increasingly urbanizing, we need more sidewalks. And we need it in more places, and we have to be willing to accept that at a certain level.
All right, I think it's 8:50 now, so I'm going to close up. Thank Andrew. His point about politics being harder than economics is a good one. As a political scientist, it warms my heart to hear it.
Sounds like you set that up.
I know.
Considering your podcast, I see
I did not say that. I will tell you, ACT board member Miriam Schonbaum, ACT's resident pedestrian safety expert, is on my podcast coming up this Friday. So if you are interested, look at it. We are dissecting the Safe Streets.
I was just going to say, she has been a great champion on the Safe Streets bill, and I would love for you to ask her about some of the amendments that I suggested in committee, because she will have very good things to say.
You should listen in. You may not be happy. All right. Thank you again. Yeah. If you're not yet an ACT member, please join. And we'll see you next month.